While on a day trip with his parents, a young boy suddenly disappeared. A search began immediately, but no trace of the child was found. After 8 months, a boy resembling the missing child was found in another state, though his mother couldn't identify the child until the next day. Another woman turned up claiming that the boy was actually her son. Scandal and an eventual trial resulted. Decades later, DNA testing confirmed that police had it all wrong, and they misidentified the found child. The child's body was never located, and it is believed that he was killed by an alligator the evening he went missing. Welcome to Without a Trace. I'm your host, Jalyn. Every file holds a mystery. Every story deserves to be heard. This is Bobby's story. Bobby Clarence Dunbar was the first son born to Leslie and Percy Dunbar, born on May 23, 1908 in Opelousas, Louisiana. Bobby's younger brother, Alonzo, was born just 2 years later. On August 23, 1912, the Dunbars went on a day trip to go fishing in the nearby Swayze Lake, a swampy area of Louisiana. As the family played in the water, Bobby wandered off and disappeared. Leslie and Percy searched everywhere for Bobby, but as their search turned up nothing, they were forced to call the authorities. The local police, and eventually the state police, began a statewide manhunt. A search party soon tracked Bobby's movements to the lakeside, leading authorities to conclude that he had fallen into the water and drowned. In a desperate effort to find the missing child, authorities caught and dissected alligators, searching for Bobby's remains. They threw dynamite into the lake, hoping it would eject his body from the water. Despite their efforts, Bobby's body never turned up. A day or so later, Bobby's hat was discovered some distance away from the lake, and people began to wonder if he might have been kidnapped. A $1,000 reward was offered for the safe return of Bobby. Over the months, the reward was raised to $6,000, and authorities continued to search for clues while the family arranged a massive search effort scouring the South from Texas to Florida for any signs, but none were found. It seemed investigators had hit a dead end until April 1913, when a boy matching Bobby's description had been found in Fox Worth, Mississippi. The boy and Bobby were described as having large, round blue eyes, hair light but turning dark, complexion very fair with rosy cheeks, well-developed, stout but not very fat. But hundreds of boys in the South likely matched that description, and after 8 months, Bobby Dunbar could have looked different. A man named William Cantell Walters had been seen with the boy. William worked as a traveling handyman, specializing in tuning and repairing pianos and organs. He had been traveling through Mississippi with a boy who appeared to match the description of Bobby. William claimed the boy was Bruce Anderson, the illegitimate child of his brother and a woman who worked for his family named Julia Anderson. William claimed Bruce had been left in his care by Julia while she left to go look for work. Julia had a different story, though. While she agreed she let her son Bruce accompany William on a business trip while she looked for work, Julia thought William was taking the boy for only a short time and not very far. She became concerned when she discovered he had taken Bruce out of state, eventually ending up in Mississippi. Strangely, Julia never reported her son missing, even though William claimed that Bruce had been with him for over a year. Many residents of the town backed William's story, stating the boy had been with William for months before Bobby went missing. The whole story was suspicious, so Percy and Leslie traveled by train to Mississippi to see if they could identify the boy. Leslie examined the child while he slept, but what happened next is still disputed to this day. One newspaper claimed it was a joyful reunion and that the boy instantly shouted "Mother" upon seeing Leslie before quickly embracing her. Other accounts claim that both Leslie and Percy were hesitant to confirm that the boy was Bobby because he didn't respond to his name and that the child cried upon seeing the adults. Some newspapers also reported on the boy's first sighting of Bobby's younger brother, Alonzo. One newspaper claimed that the boy recognized his brother instantly, calling him by name and kissing him, while other newspapers say the boy showed no sign of recognizing Alonzo. The Dunbars left Mississippi with the boy, heading to New Orleans to meet with John Parker Sr., a family friend and a prominent political figure. They wanted John to examine the boy to determine if he was actually Bobby. After studying the boy and questioning a number of witnesses, John made his decision. He had no doubt that the boy was Bobby. The Dunbars boarded a train and took Bobby back to their home. Word of John's decision quickly spread through Opelousas. When the community learned that the Dunbars were returning with Bobby, the town held a celebration. On April 25, 1913, hundreds of people waited hours to get a glimpse of the boy with his parents. During the remainder of that year, Percy and Bobby were asked to make special appearances at many social events, fairs, and festivals around the area. The next day, after taking the boy home for the night and bathing him, Leslie said that she had positively identified moles and scars on his body that confirmed the boy was in fact her missing son Bobby. While the majority of the community was ecstatic for the Dunbars, many people were troubled by the fact that Bobby had only been missing for 8 months, but the only way his mother could identify him was through moles. Additionally, they relied on a family friend to identify their missing son. Regardless, the police allowed the boy to remain in the Dunbars' care. Back in Mississippi, police were quick to arrest William, charging him with the kidnapping of Bobby. He was held in jail while waiting his trial. Shortly after Bobby's homecoming, William Walters wrote a letter to the Dunbars from his jail cell claiming the child was Bruce Anderson, son of a North Carolina woman named Julia Anderson. Julia quickly arrived to prove the boy was in fact her son. A newspaper paid to bring Julia to Opelousas to see if she could identify the child. The police called the Dunbars back, requesting that Bobby be part of a lineup to see if Julia could correctly identify him. One by one, Julia was presented with 5 different boys who were of the same age as her son, including the boy who had been claimed by the Dunbars. When the boy in question was presented, he reportedly gave no indication that he recognized her. She also didn't seem to recognize him and asked whether he was the boy that was recovered. But when she was not given an answer, she admitted that she was unsure if he was her son. Julia returned the next day claiming that she was, in fact, confident that the boy identified as Bobby Dunbar was actually her son Bruce. She asked for a second meeting and was allowed to see Bobby once again. After undressing him and recognizing some moles, she was certain the boy was her son. Though Leslie was also initially hesitant to claim the child, the public only focused on Julia's hesitancy. Word had already spread that she had been hesitant the day before and failed to positively identify him on the first attempt. This, combined with the fact that newspapers questioned her moral character and having had 3 children out of wedlock, her failure to report her son missing, and claims that she was a prostitute, led to Julia's claims being dismissed. One New Orleans newspaper said Julia was worse than an animal, stating, quote, "Animals don't forget, but this big, coarse countrywoman, several times a mother, she forgot. Children were only regrettable incidents in her life. Of true motherly love, she has none." Authorities didn't believe the boy was Bruce, and given the fact that the boy was living comfortably with the Dunbars, the courts were hesitant to bring the case back up. With no money to sustain a long court battle, Julia returned home to North Carolina alone. At this point, the Dunbars were fully confident that the child was Bobby. He had acclimated to returning home well and was playing with his brother and showing signs of remembering things at the house. Authorities also used this as evidence against William in his trial. Julia returned to Louisiana for William's trial to attest to his innocence and pushed for the court to determine that the child was her son, Bruce. Though in doing so, she had to leave her eldest child, Bernice, behind in North Carolina. At the trial, she became acquainted with the residents of the town of Poplarville, Mississippi, many of whom had also come to proclaim William's innocence. William and the boy had spent quite a bit of time in the town during their travels, and the community there had come to know them well, with a number of them asserting that they had seen William with the boy long before Bobby disappeared. Despite their testimony, the court reached the determination that the boy was in fact Bobby. William was convicted of kidnapping and faced the death penalty. Following the trial, the boy remained in the custody of the Dunbar family and lived out the remainder of his life as Bobby Dunbar. William served 2 years in prison before his attorney was successful in appealing the conviction. William was then granted the right to a new trial. However, due to the excessive costs of the first trial, the court declined to try him again and instead released him. After his release from police custody, William resumed life as a traveling handyman. For the rest of his life, William always maintained his innocence. He passed away on April 7, 1945. After the trial, the people of Poplarville welcomed Julia as she began a new life there, eventually marrying and having 7 children. She became a devout Christian, helped found a church, and served as a nurse and midwife to the small community. Although her children indicated that her life was a happy one after settling in Poplarville, they said that she nonetheless spoke often about her lost son and that their family always regarded him as having been kidnapped by the Dunbars. Julia passed away on February 1, 1940, never having been able to reunite with her son Bruce. A few years after the trial, Leslie divorced Percy and left Opelousas. Apparently, Percy engaged in ongoing infidelity and allegedly stabbed a man in 1920, 8 years to the day after Bobby's disappearance. She married again and lived in Virginia for several years. She later returned to Louisiana in the 1950s after divorcing her second husband. She married a third time and lived out the remainder of her life in an old hotel in a small town in Louisiana before passing away in 1971. Percy remained in Opelousas and continued to work in his insurance business and was involved in politics. He passed away on March 9, 1931. Alonzo married and raised a family in Opelousas, where he took over his father's insurance business. He passed away on September 9, 1959. The boy, raised as Bobby Dunbar, lived out the remainder of his life in Opelousas. He married Marjorie Byers and had 4 children, Bobby Jr., John, Gerald, and Mary. Bobby ran a gas station. At one point in 1954, Bobby Dunbar Jr. asked his father if he was sure he was really Bobby or not. His father responded, quote, "I know who I am and I know who you are, and nothing else makes a difference." One of Julia's sons, Hollis, recounted that in 1944, the boy who grew up as Bobby Dunbar visited him at his place of business and chatted with him. His sister, Jules, has also recounted a similar experience where a man who she believes to have been her half-brother, Bruce, came to the service station where she worked and talked to her for an extended period of time. The Dunbar family also has a similar story. The family was returning home from a trip in 1963, and while passing through Poplarville, Bobby said, quote, "Those are the people they came to pick me up from." Bobby Dunbar passed away on March 8, 1966, bringing any truth he knew with him to the grave. For decades, the public considered the case of Bobby Dunbar solved. William Cantell Walters kidnapped Bobby, and after 8 months, the boy was returned to his family. The child grew up as a Dunbar and even named his son Bobby Dunbar Jr. The Dunbar family dismissed Julia's claims that the child was her son Bruce until 2004, nearly a century after Bobby's disappearance. Remarkably, the person who finally cracked the case was the daughter of Bobby Dunbar Jr. In 1999, 33 years after Bobby's death, one of his granddaughters, Margaret Dunbar Cutright, began her own investigation into the events. She pored through newspaper accounts, interviewed the children of Julia Anderson, and examined the notes and evidence presented by William Walters' defense attorney. She began pushing for DNA testing, and eventually, Bobby Dunbar Jr. consented to provide his DNA. The results showed that Bobby Jr. was not related by blood to the Dunbars. Instead, the DNA test proved the boy traveling with William Walters was in fact William's nephew. The exoneration unfortunately came long after William died. While waiting in jail to learn whether he might be executed for kidnapping, William wrote, quote, "It seems that I must suffer now for an imaginary sin or crime that has never been committed. Dying, I can look up through the ethereal blue of heaven, thank God, and say that my conscience is clear." Although Margaret had initially hoped to prove that her grandfather was a Dunbar, her research ultimately led her to doubt her belief. Margaret, after years of research, concluded both Percy and Leslie did not believe this boy was their son, and the grief took its toll on their marriage. The results of Margaret's investigation brought joy to Julia Anderson's family, as it vindicated her claims that the child was in fact her son Bruce. The results also helped William Walter's family prove that William never kidnapped Bobby Dunbar. Though her findings had sown discord within her own family, as the majority of her grandfather's children and grandchildren considered themselves to be members of the Dunbar family, they were resentful of Margaret for having delved into the matter and for bringing it back into the public eye. Despite setting out to solve the mystery, the results of the DNA testing only muddied the waters more. It was now clear that the boy who lived out his life as Bobby Dunbar was not in fact Bobby. So where was the real Bobby? Margaret has her own theory and believes that Bobby fell into the lake during the fishing trip and was eaten by an alligator. Some journalists theorized that Leslie and Percy Dunbar had done something to their son and used Bruce to cover the deeds. Authorities claimed that they found footprints leading away from the lake and that they heard claims from locals that a suspicious-looking man had been carrying Bobby away, but these rumors were never confirmed. Thank you for listening to Without a Trace. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into Bobby's disappearance. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and follow Without a Trace on social media, and join me next week as I dive into another case.